to the first session of Stream B, Threats, Vulnerabilities, and Risks, of course. The whole of Stream B is sponsored very kindly by ESIT, so thank you to our sponsors for that. We've swapped the sessions around a little bit, which you heard from at the beginning of today. So this is the session we had planned for tomorrow afternoon. We've just swapped those two round. Everything will be as planned today. And I should start by introducing myself. So I'm Felicity Oswald. I'm the NCSC's Chief Operating Officer, and I have the pleasure to have 4 amazing guests with me today for this panel. So the panel is to talk about the future of cybersecurity threat in particular. And the title of the session is The Future Belongs to Those Who Prepare for It Today. So as part of the session and in conversation, we have with us, so welcome Lisa Fong from New Zealand's National Cybersecurity Centre. Lisa is the Deputy Director General at GCSB and has full responsibility for their NCSC. Next, we have Morgan Adamski. Morgan is from NSA, where Morgan is she is Director for the Cybersecurity Collaboration Centre within NSA. Next on the panel, we have Rob Jones, who's the Director General for Threat Leadership at the UK's National Crime Agency. And lastly, Gemma Ungud-Thomas. Gemma is Director for Cyber at the UK's Cabinet Office. This session is also being filmed for our YouTube channel, so welcome to YouTube viewers, and I hope there's an opportunity for lots of you to watch back or comment on that stream as well. So the first question to kick us off today is really about the title of this session. So the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. Feels relatively trite or a bland statement, but I'd really like to dig into that. And I'll ask each of the panel members in turn to talk us through what's their view on that statement. Do they agree with it and why? Lisa, can I come to you first?
Kia ora. Thanks so much, Felicity. Thanks for having us. So I want to talk a little bit about the New Zealand context first and some of the emerging threatscape. Then one of the key shifts I'd like to see as we think about planning for the future. New Zealand is a small economy, and as a result, we're a net technology taker. And geopolitically, we don't set the agenda in multilateral institutions or in international technology standards forums. However, we still experience all the same vulnerabilities and threats and all of the opportunity of technology. And in terms of our sort of relative agency on the international stage, that means that we are particularly reliant and supportive of international partnerships with other governments and industry. Our view of the threatscape maps to the global threat environment and looking out over the coming 3 years, anticipate a continuation of what we currently have. What that means geopolitically is as tensions rise, we see that play back pretty quickly on the cyber threat landscape, sometimes in unpredictable ways. We have assessed that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has reduced the indirect impacts of cyber threat activity within New Zealand. That was contrary to what we were monitoring for and our assessed view that we could anticipate indiscriminate impacts akin to NotPetya as a result of that invasion. On the other hand, in our region, with increasing investment in security, we are seeing the changing threatscape, both in the wider region, playing back into New Zealand as well, and our forthcoming cyber threat report will provide a greater assessment of that. In terms of capability or the technology operating environment, over the successive reporting years, we've seen an increased blurring between state and non-state activities. Around a third of the incidents reported to us by nationally significant organisations have been unattributed, so unable to determine what nature of threat actor. This is, as we all know, as a result of the increasing commercial availability of sophisticated tools in the hands of criminal and financially motivated actors, but equally our sophisticated state actors are not using the latest 0 days, they are using the lowest common denominators. We have reached the point of adequate persistent threat or getting the threat actor we deserve. I suppose over the coming years we will be monitoring closely for machine learning and compute power and what that might do to the proliferation, pace and sophistication of the cyber threat. In turning to the future and what we might do today, I'm keeping in mind for this particular session one key shift I'd like to see. Right now, there's disproportionate harm being experienced by victims who do not have the means of control. And when those victims include utilities, public service providers who meet the basic needs of society, we'd run the risk that we undermine those institutions through loss of trust and confidence. And we need to start addressing that today. 3 ways in which I think we need to focus on that problem. Firstly, it's to ensure we keep maintaining the basics. That changes over time, and so we need to simplify that process. The NCSC's recently released its cybersecurity framework in order to encourage investment across a range of domains by organisations so that they have a well-balanced cybersecurity protection portfolio. It's also to encourage ongoing conversation between senior leaders and technical experts over time so they can see how the maturity is shifting. It keeps the language out of the technical weeds deliberately. I also see an important role for collaboration with both the private sector and other governments. With respect to the private sector, there's a lot that's happening already. We can see that through our baseline security templates, which will provide secure minimum controls and continuous assurance across a couple of cloud providers. Equally, we've been partnering with the private sector in New Zealand to share high-quality threat intelligence so that those commercial providers can scale our protections by detecting and disrupting across the wider economy. Something that's pretty exciting, which we released last week, is a move up the value chain into security by design. So looking to focus more heavily on ensuring that technology product development is in itself built securely. Government, of course, has its own responsibilities. There needs to be a long-term program. There are certain activities that you can't spin up in moments of crisis, and those are in the regulatory and advisory space around, for instance, digital identity, emerging technology, resilient critical infrastructure, as well as investing in the uplift of our Pacific nation neighbours. What I've described there very briefly is activity across a range of domains. We all have a role to play in keeping our decision space open for the future.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. Morgan, does the future belong to those who prepare for it today?
Thanks, Felicity. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me in this beautiful city of Belfast. So I'm going to disagree with the statement a little bit. What I would offer is that the future belongs to those who prepared yesterday, but if you haven't done it, today is the best day to start. And so, you know, from a national security agency perspective and a US government perspective, obviously we just recently released our new national cybersecurity strategy, which outlines 5 pillars focusing on securing critical infrastructure, countering our adversaries, shaping US markets, resiliency, and foreign partnerships, right? And those make sense to almost everyone in this room as to why they are critical. For NSA, we play a big part in all 5 of those pillars. But what I would offer to you in terms of the future belongs to those who prepared yesterday is what we see from a significant amount of cyber attacks, disruptive, destructive, ransomware attacks, and talking to a lot of private sector partners is we have partners who are extremely well prepared in terms of they know who to pick up the phone and who to call when they have an issue. They have a playbook, they understand what data they need to save, they understand what their trusted relationships are and who they can call. But sometimes we have people that have no idea how to do that. And so what I would offer is one of the key things that we see when we talk about being prepared in the face of a cyber attack or something on your networks is you focus less on the threat in terms of getting prepared and focus more on your processes and really building strong partnerships. I know from a US government perspective, we have strong partnerships with our FBI and DHS CISA counterparts, but I know a lot of our big companies as well know exactly who to reach out to, which is a great process for us. The other thing that we have a lot of conversations for, and when we're talking about how we are preparing and building those type of resiliency efforts, is really fundamentally understanding your strengths as a network owner and where you're taking risk. We all take risk every single day. We have to do that from a prioritization perspective, but really having a fundamental understanding of doing asset discovery, what you're doing for patch management, how you're operating your networks every day, where are you making resource decisions. It's really important for you to have that risk profile so that when you know a specific actor is taking advantage of certain techniques to get into your network, if you're carrying risk in that space, you just be acutely aware of how you're going to address it if something goes wrong. And then lastly, I would just offer, if you work in the cybersecurity business, organized chaos is what we do every single day. And what we want to be able to do when you're working through a cyber crisis and you're working through all of those plans is build an organization and a process that can be agile and that can adapt. Very rarely do people build playbooks, then try to execute them and get past page 3. And I think that's part of the problem we see often is people will say, oh, I built an entire plan for how I'm prepared to protect my networks. Great. The adversary just did 14 different things you weren't expecting. So I'm going to need you to adapt and change, and we're going to be okay. And so I think when we think about how we prepare for the future, it's really about being agile, having those partnerships, having a plan, and then being prepared to react. And that's really where resiliency plays a fantastic role.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. So build on some of those comments. So loads in that. Something useful to say or add from a cybercrime perspective. I think for us, what we need to see, and the future really belongs to people who will not become victims, but are cyber survivors. So expect to be attacked. Focus on what you do when you're attacked. Behave responsibly, be agile, get after the problem. And just like Ukraine, they're survivors, not victims. You can get after it, you can cycle through the attack, you can recover quickly, and you can move on. The cybercrime business model all relies upon the power imbalance between somebody that presents as a victim and an attacker that's got their data. And you know, the ransomware model is all built on leverage because of encrypting data. You completely disempower that attacker if you can handle that. And there's lots of ways you can. And doing the basics well really, really matters. And if you've done the basics well, and what we see more and more in the UK, because of great work by NCSC, because of Cyber Essentials, you know, those figures earlier, 32% of companies in the UK being attacked. We are cycling through that day on day. It's a massive volume of hostile reconnaissance and attacks, but fewer and fewer of them actually make a big, big impact, touch wood. That is because people are learning to be survivors, not victims, and are getting through it. And some of the attacks mentioned, without going into operational detail, some of what Lindy alluded to with recent attacks, the behavior of those survivors, not victims, has been brilliant. They've reached out like they've never reached out before. They've been really, really good with law enforcement. They've had a good CIR company. They've known who to call. Their playbook, they've prioritized. They haven't just gone through it slavishly. They've done what mattered. So if you do the simple things well, you'll be a survivor, not a victim. And that's where the future belongs.
Okay, thank you. Gemma.
Great, thank you. And also, brilliant to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, just to build and really agree with a lot of the comments already made. Development of key technologies already sort of dominating this space, and you know we're all completely alive to that. And also, as we would have heard with Lindy's comments this morning, particularly on China and how the technologies are being harnessed in particular ways, which give us great cause for concern. I guess from my perspective at the Cabinet Office, we have our National Cybersecurity Strategy, which is quite clear in terms of our national priorities around that space. But I think the really important thing in here, and agree with the previous comments there about, you know, preparing today for a secure tomorrow, even better, prepare yesterday for an even securer tomorrow. There's a lot there that we need to unpack, and you know, partnerships, planning, all of that. Totally agree with. The recent, we published a refresh of the integrated review last month, and this is a really big question in that, about how we position the UK to shape the international environment in a way that is conducive to our values and security, including how we maintain sustained efforts on AI and other technologies. So this is a really, really big question for us, and I think it really does come back to some of what Lindy was saying this morning about building in cybersecurity at the outset into this technology and getting that baked in at the start into the supply chains, so that then means that it's more secure, which is the benefit for us in government, but also in industry, but also for the citizen. And I think also that then will play through in terms of the public trust in these technologies. So I think getting that right is going to be so crucial in terms of our planning for tomorrow.
Thank you all so much. Now, this is the threat stream. That's what everyone signed up for today. So let's focus for a while on the threats specifically. We all know, and it's one of the reasons we're here, is that threats in cyber don't stand still. So I'd really like to understand how your organisations are paying attention to those new adversaries or new threats on the horizon. Morgan, can I start with you to tell us a bit about that and maybe what you think we should be looking out for in the next few years?
Yeah, so I'll first talk a little bit about what specifically the US government and the National Security Agency is doing. When I think about the cybersecurity business and the threats that we see today, it's a little like a kid's soccer, or should I say football game, right? We're constantly trying to follow the ball and figure out what the next threat is that we have to deal with. And what we're required to do on every single day is ruthless prioritization. What are the things that we can deal with today, and how do we stay focused on the future threats? So one of the fundamental shifts made at the National Security Agency back in October 2019 is the stand-up of our Cybersecurity Directorate. And in that directorate, we did something very deliberate. We took the experts who think like cyber actors, who understand the adversaries and follow them every single day, and we paired them in organizations sitting side by side with those who fundamentally understand the critical weapon systems, networks that we need to defend in support of the Department of Defense. And what we have seen in the last couple years has been absolutely magical in that we now have more enriched conversations on, okay, if adversaries are actively using these techniques and targeting these networks, well, wait a second, if they're targeting these networks, they're trying to go after this weapons platform. And that has actually made us much more aware of how we build mitigations and defenses to better protect those things. We've also extended that conversation to just not having a conversation between the people who understand the threat actors and the net defenders, but we've also brought in our defense intelligence base, our DIB, our defense contractors, the ones who produce all of these weapons platforms, into the conversation, similar to what Lisa was talking about. And we have started to share a ton of intelligence and information and technical expertise with those companies. And that is happening within minutes and hours as opposed to weeks and months. And it is enabling us to rapidly build mitigations to protect against those attacks before or right as they're happening. And that has been another thing for us that has been game-changing in terms of getting ahead of the threats. I would also offer from a US perspective, a lot of our US private sector critical infrastructure owners have great insight into what adversaries are doing against their networks every single day. And so we have learned a ton just from having those conversations of, okay, what are you seeing? How do we protect against it? And really has allowed us to build a more comprehensive picture of what is happening in the threat landscape. That's been a big part for us. The second piece that I would offer is in the Cybersecurity Directorate, we have also put a lot of emphasis against protecting and maintaining all of the additional future research efforts, right? How are we looking at future technology? How are we studying emerging technology to better understand what's coming on the horizon? You can do that easily from attending these fantastic conferences, right? And engaging in these conversations. So I think that's a really important thing to do just to stay aware of all the threats. The last part I'll just touch on from when we talk about future threats is, and you talked about securing future technology. Gemma talked about it a little bit as well, from a secure by design, secure by default. We are making concerted effort in sitting side by side with our allied nations, focusing on what is our presence and role in standards development organizations. So how are we playing in the cybersecurity standards realm to ensure that we are securing future technology and 5G and 6G, things like AI, ML, obviously, crypto standards, all of those things. And so really focusing on how do we have a better presence there so we can ensure that future technology is secure. The last part that people may not recognize is that the National Security Agency is home to the keys, codes, and crypto mission for the US nation. So we produce all of the cryptographic key to secure the most secure, US critical mission systems. Cryptography is the last line of defense. We always share that point. It's one of our key focuses. So post-quantum modernization is a very key focus for us in CSD. A quantum computer is coming. It's just when, not if.
Yeah.
And so when that quantum computer boots up, if your information is not quantum resistant, it is susceptible to attack. And so that is how we are focusing on the future emerging technologies and how we really work in that space.
Thank you. Rob, can I bring you in? What do you think we're going to see over the next few years, and how are you guys keeping up with the threat?
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, I think it's going to, some of it will be more of the same, but better enabled with the, arms race with technology that's playing out in front of us and the accessibility. We've already had it today repeatedly, AI, ChatGPT, machine learning, all of these things, the cybercrime ecosystem that supports cybercrime is as good as the wider digital ecosystem that we're commending here today. And what the bad guys are doing is evolving as that wider digital ecosystem evolves. And they are very quick to adopt new technology, and they're doing it right now. So what we are doing with industry, public-private partnership, and what you've alluded to there, is at the heart of this. Anything that happens on the internet, it's quite rare that governments are going to be better than industry at seeing new stuff. And we've got to reflect on that as a collective and get better at working with industry. So on our strategic governance group for cybercrime, we've got industry representatives. That is the only governance group across organised crime where we've got that. And it's a game changer because, in terms of early changes and early shifts, it's just great. What we do with Undercover Online and our infiltration of criminal marketplaces, we talk more about because we can avow it, we do it to an evidential standard, and we see a lot from that insight as well, and we'll carry on doing that. I think there's a lot more we can do with infrastructure that is quite low equity and quite low level that we shouldn't be concerned about talking about, because the ecosystem that we're trying to disrupt, we need to systematically map it, get after it, and take it down. And do that at scale, because that ecosystem, as it gets more capable, gets more and more worrying because there's such a low barrier of entry to it. We talked a lot about great work by the US around Genesis and access to compromised credentials being used in cybercrime and fraud. That was number one on every search engine optimized on the open web. Bang, straight in, you've got compromised credentials, a wiki on how you commit cybercrime and fraud. And you could do that with knowing nothing about technology and crime. So for me, it's about the ecosystem, it's about disrupting it at scale, and it's about really understanding where it goes with those technology changes and trying to desperately raise the barrier to entry because it is so accessible. And we expect nation states to make more use of that because they can just burn it. The unholy alliance between sophisticated state actors and cyber criminals means that you can really get after things at scale by using those criminal tactics, and that crossover will get worse and worse, particularly with crypto and sanctions evasion.
If I could just offer a couple of other things when we think about the next 3 to 5 years, completely agree with all the comments that have been made. What I would offer is, Lisa talked a little bit about working with those managed service providers to scale out detections to protect multiple customers at once. Our adversaries have budgets as well, and their bosses are asking them, how do you scale the attacks? So just understand that most likely we're going to see our adversaries spending a lot of time figuring out how to target those managed service providers because they can really hit a bunch of victims all at once, right? And so we really have to focus on that. Obviously, with the move to the cloud, our adversaries will follow us there. And so they will get they will hone their tradecraft, they will get more sophisticated if they need to get into those networks. I would, the other point that was made by Lisa and the fact that it's usually low-level, living off the land type techniques that our adversaries are continuing to get in our networks. We often pass out the top 10 mitigation risks to companies when they ask, how do I avoid this? Well, here's the top 10 things. Are you doing all of them? But we're going to really start to see adversaries start to use more unique tradecraft and exploits to get into networks. 0 days, obviously with the Hafnium exploit and the Microsoft Exchange, we saw that PRC actors doubled down on exploitation once that was released. They did not stop, right? So they are taking advantage of the fact that when these vulnerabilities are released and there's no mitigation or patch in place, we see a lot of adversaries swarm to start to really exploit it and take advantage of it. So I think we're going to continue to see that as well. And then the last point I would offer is that just like all of us, we learn when cyber attacks happen. We do lessons learned or after actions, and we study, okay, how could we have done this better? The adversaries are learning from our after actions. They're knowing how we defended and protected against it. So when you look at things like SolarWinds from a supply chain check perspective, you then see 3CX, which industry is attributed to North Korea, right? So they are learning and they are adapting. So I'm going to think we're going to see a lot of replays over the next 3 to 5 years, just different actors really trying out things to see what works.
Thank you. So scaling up speed, agility, keeping current is the challenge of all of us in the cybersecurity community. I'm really interested to explore what's the role of government specifically. Lisa, have you got thoughts on how we can ensure that we keep current and then what our role in the broader ecosystem is for that?
Yeah. I see a role for government providing and keeping current its picture of the wider operating environment and moving with the technology as it shifts. Something that we find time and again we can contribute to incident response is the ability to contextualize what an individual organisation is seeing. Individual organisations have increasing maturity across their own systems and potentially their own supply ecosystem. What we're able to do through partnership with industry is to identify the severity and speed and scale of an attack, and through our partnership with intelligence agencies globally, we're able to offer insight against the threat actors' motivation and capability. So that's additional context that we can bring to an organisation's efforts to do the firefighting. Equally, if we have good pre-existing relationships with those agencies, with industry, we're able to get ahead of those threats before they're causing harm. We're able to play a pretty special place in the ecosystem as a trusted advisor, as long as we're conscious in fostering that role. What we've had success in achieving in New Zealand is secure information exchange between technical experts in contexts where you would otherwise expect those organisations to be looking for competitive advantage. We're really keen that security is not a luxury, it isn't externalised as a cost, and it isn't a point of competitive advantage. And the more that we can foster that by facilitating conversation amongst commercial providers, the more success we will have in defending against threats proactively. Finally, of course, we are also an authority. We are in a position to set standards and to provide guidance that gives confidence to organisations, both domestically and internationally, if we join up with our international partners, to invest with confidence in the right controls across a range of domains, and thereby lift resilience generally across the economy. The points that have come through already this morning around international partnership, we've discussed quite closely yesterday. As increasing regulation comes to the space, we would like to see greater unification around standards.
Really crucial. Government's role in terms of supporting industry takes many forms, and you heard some of that from Lindy this morning about how we help C&I regulators understand the threats that they face, and the alert that has issued today, highlighting that is a really good example of that ongoing work, in addition to the early warning system and the active cyber defence measures that are in place. So we have a suite of activity there for where we can help support industry in particular. I think industry more widely in their role in terms of events that we've seen, particularly with the war in Ukraine, is that they have a really big role. Companies have a really big role in this space. Technology companies have brought support, capacity building, a whole range of different levers to that, which have been hugely impactful as that has played out. And we're just really keen to continue the conversations with how that works to draw through that insight. They're often seeing a lot more on their networks, and this is a partnership for which we can all come together and discuss more. So that's really a crucial area of thinking that we're keen to pursue. But that's not the only thing. There are other levers here to improve the ecosystem skills. Huge challenge for us all. As I think CDL called out this morning, we have a shortfall of 14,000 skilled experts in the UK. That's quite a big challenge. So at the centre, we're really thinking about how we can make some interventions in the system to try and get that pipeline of people coming through, and that will have benefit and gain to all of us. And we are also discussing with our international partners and comparing notes about the best ways to do that. So I think that those would be the main points that I would draw out. And it's certainly something that would be, on skills particularly, we'll be discussing later today, as Oliver Dowden, Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office, will be chairing the National Cyber Advisory Board meeting, and we'll be discussing how further interventions we can make on skills. So it's really top of our agenda at the moment.
Thank you. So I am relatively new to my role in NCSC, but I was here for stand-up of NCSC back in 2016-17. At about that time, lots of us in the community were talking about Cybergeddon. And we've had some really difficult cyber moments. I won't call them out, but we could all list the top kind of 4 or 5 things that have happened in the last 5 or 6 years. What we haven't seen, though, is that real kind of crunch moment for cyber. I think we've been tested in different ways. One of the concepts in risk is this thing about black swans. It's not a term I love, it's not particularly inclusive, but the idea that there's something that is beyond our conception that we should be preparing for. What are those things we should be seriously worrying about that maybe don't feel very close now, or the combination of risks that might materialise? Gemma, can I come back to you with a kind of risk hat on, thinking about the future of cyber, and then any other panel members that want to come in?
Grim Reaper for the day.
I can go first, and then Rob, I'm sure, can cheer us up a bit more. But yeah, I think, look, last few years particularly we've had some shocks to the system, right? COVID particularly, which we've all reflected on, has changed many of our assumptions in this space. And again, to the previous point, this is why getting the ecosystem working well for all of us at all levels in terms of, resilience planning skills is really key. I think, again, the CNI alert in terms of threat awareness and preparedness is super key. We also have a lot more focus on horizon scanning and looking ahead at how that is going to shape up and how that might affect us down the line, which goes to the previous points that Rob was making around preparedness, exercising, and making sure we have the right processes in place to respond when we need to. But I think fundamentally it comes back to the real key element of having core, basic cyber hygiene, which is fundamental to all of this, which will stop quite a lot of the low-level attacks and the low-level shocks from hitting us. When you've got that core level in place, and you're, as an organisation, regularly preparing, exercising, and stress testing your systems, then you're in a much better position to be able to respond to things that may come down the line.
Anyone else want to come in on
Did you want to cheer up?
the future?
So, I attended a conference a little while ago where Lindy was on stage talking a little about, that she got asked the question of, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah.
And she gave a really fantastic answer. She said, I've seen a lot of things. I've prepared, I've been through a lot of events. What keeps me up at night is that 10, 20 years down the road, my predecessor will call me and say, why didn't you think of that? So after I had that nightmare multiple times, what we've seen in the last couple years and experienced in terms of cybersecurity, especially at the national level, is, SolarWinds, Log4j, Hafnium, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, like multiple events. What worries me most is there are multiple times I looked at my counterparts across the National Security Agency and said, I'm not sure we can take one more thing. And at the end of the day, cybersecurity is built on the workforce, right? If we all have shortages in that workforce, but we also all struggle with retaining that workforce because it's an extremely high tempo. And so for me, talk about black swans or things that we can't predict. What worries me the most is if we have to counter multiple significant attacks and we don't necessarily have the workforce for that resiliency or that depth, and we're able to give them that break. And that is where partnerships, international partnerships, industry partnerships, right? I look at my industry partners, through our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center is literally sitting side by side, fighting the same thing with me, is how do we build those extensions of our networks? But that is what concerns me most, is that how do we ensure we have the right workforce that can withstand having to deal with multiple events at once?
Great.
Just really briefly,
thank
carry
you.
on with the downward spiral. I mean, there's a couple of things, really. So the people thing and resilience in people and losing skills at crucial times because of a lack of resilience, I think keeps us all up at night. The thing that really bothers me and worries me is what we know about critical national infrastructure. It's well protected. We put a lot into it. The really difficult cases we've been involved in are the who knew. We've got this system, and do you know it supports, oh my God. And a lot of work has been done to mitigate that. A lot of work has been done to map it, but it's dependencies. And I still think because of technical debt across the UK and across the world, there's lots of the who knew moments to come where you realise that something is being underpinned by a system which isn't protected and isn't up to date. And that really worries me.
A brief positive note.
Yes, give us 5 seconds of
A
positivity,
brief
Lisa.
yes, absolutely, workforce. We have to focus on this. In the same time, if we focus on secure by design, we will reduce the need for that expertise out in the wider public.
Good positive.
Well done.
Thank you so much. We've ended the session, hopefully, on a bit of a positive note. And I would encourage you all to have a return to some of the future threat sessions over the next day and a half. Thank you so much again to my panel.
Thank you.